After the meeting, an elderly man intercepted Mark in the parking lot. He introduced himself as Frank, former HOA treasurer, his weathered face suggesting years of Florida sun. "Pick your battles, son," Frank whispered, leaning on his cane. Last guy who challenged Hurricane Karen found his sprinklers mysteriously running at 3 a.m. until his water bill hit 4 figures. "She's got friends at the utility company." Frank glanced around nervously. "My wife had a heart attack last year. Ambulance got stuck at the main entrance. GPS directed them wrong. I told Deborah we needed better emergency access, not less. 2 weeks later, I was voted off the board for financial irregularities that never existed." Mark drove home, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Through his windshield, he could see the bright yellow padlock already gleaming on the emergency gate, reflecting streetlights like a warning beacon. Sarah waved from their front porch, Tyler beside her eating ice cream, both blissfully unaware of the invisible web of control tightening around their new home. The moving truck had barely pulled away when Mark Henderson received his first HOA violation notice. Their welcome mat was 2 inches larger than regulations permitted. Mark laughed it off as he stood in the driveway of their dream home in the Pines, a pristine suburban community with streets named after tree species and lawn height measured with military precision. "Welcome to paradise," his wife Sarah joked, tossing the notice into their recycling bin. Their 8-year-old son Tyler was already racing across the street to the playground, his laughter echoing against the backdrop of eerily identical houses. 3 doors down, Deborah Wilkins, HOA president for 6 consecutive terms, watched through parted curtains, clipboard in hand. The neighbors called her Hurricane Karen for her ability to sweep through the community, leaving destruction in her wake. Destroyed garden domes, banished basketball hoops, and tears from newcomers who dared to paint their mailbox the wrong shade of beige. Mark had noticed the emergency access gate during their home tour and considered it a selling point. The realtor had emphasized how the gate provided crucial quick access to Memorial Hospital, just 3 minutes away via the service road versus 10 minutes through regular streets. With Tyler's severe peanut allergy, those minutes could mean everything in an emergency. The Hendersons' first week in the Pines felt like living in a simulation. Neighbors smiled with practiced precision, but kept conversations superficial. Mark observed odd behaviors. Residents scurrying to remove empty trash bins within 7 minutes of garbage collection, children playing at carefully modulated volumes, and garden hoses never left uncoiled. One neighbor was frantically repainting her front door at dusk. Deborah didn't approve the color, the woman explained breathlessly when she caught Mark watching. "She's doing surprise inspections tonight." On day 9, Sarah found a typed note in their mailbox. "Lawn appears 2.7 inches high. Regulation maximum is 2.5 inches. Please remedy within 24 hours. Do you? Is she measuring our grass with a ruler?" Sarah asked incredulously. "Who does that?" The answer came the next morning when Mark spotted Deborah prowling the subdivision at dawn, wearing khakis and a polo shirt embroidered with the Pines HOA, carrying a digital measuring tool and documenting infractions on an iPad. At his first HOA meeting, Mark sat stunned as Deborah dominated the room. Her pearl necklace clicked like a metronome as she projected a PowerPoint of neighborhood shame photos, unauthorized bird feeders, non-regulation mailbox posts, and a child's chalk drawing that had remained on a driveway for an excessive period of 27 hours. The atmosphere was suffocating, residents avoiding eye contact as Deborah singled out violators by name and address. When she announced plans to padlock the emergency access gate at the back of the park, Mark's hand shot up. "That gate cuts hospital access time from 10 minutes to 3, he pointed out. "My son has severe allergies. That could make a life or death difference." Deborah's smile never reached her eyes. "Well, Mark, those 3 minutes have brought skateboarding hooligans from the apartments behind us. They're using our park, stealing our property values." She emphasized our as if Mark's family hadn't earned full community rights yet. "Emergency services have keys. The gate gets locked." A heavyset man in the 3rd row nodded vigorously. "My Mercedes was keyed last month. Those apartment kids don't respect our property. The tennis court was left unlocked overnight," added a woman wearing tennis whites despite the evening hour. "I found candy wrappers. It's disgusting." As residents nodded like bobbleheads, some in agreement, others in fear, Mark noticed a pattern. The vocal supporters all lived on Deborah Street, Magnolia Circle, the neighborhood's most expensive cul-de-sac. "Has anyone actually seen these hooligans?" Mark pressed, because blocking emergency access seems extreme for some candy wrappers. Deborah's eyes narrowed. "We don't question security measures in the Pines, Mr. Henderson. Perhaps in your previous neighborhood, things were different." Her emphasis suggested knowledge of their former middle-class address. The vote proceeded without further discussion. 23 hands raised in favor, including 7 board members who moved in unison like synchronized swimmers. Mark's lone opposition hand hung awkwardly in the air. "My Hassan is dying," Mark screamed, gesturing wildly to Tyler's motionless form. "Open the gate." Deborah peered through his window, her eyes widening momentarily before her face hardened. "The ambulance has the proper access codes. You should have waited for professionals instead of." Mark fumbled for the emergency key, but in his panic, it slipped through his fingers, skittering under the seat, unreachable. "Please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "He has minutes." "Rules exist for a reason," Deborah replied, stepping back from his car. "I suggest you take the proper route." The proper route took 17 agonizing minutes, through weekend traffic, past a fender bender, and behind a painfully slow funeral procession. Throughout the drive, Mark performed one-handed CPR at red lights, while Tyler's pulse grew weaker beneath his fingertips. Tyler's heart stopped twice in the emergency room. "Time off." The doctor's grim announcement was interrupted by a nurse's shout as the monitor suddenly blipped back to life. Against impossible odds, Tyler clung to existence while machines breathed for him and doctors fought the massive anaphylactic cascade destroying his body. Sarah arrived to find Mark broken, slumped against the waiting room wall, still wearing garden gloves caked with his son's vomit. When she learned what had happened, what Deborah had done, her grief transformed into something terrible and beautiful, righteous fury. While Tyler lay in pediatric intensive care, Sarah didn't just call the fire marshal. She called her college roommate at the regional news desk, her brother-in-law, the malpractice attorney, her friend who ran the county's largest community Facebook group. By morning, the Pines' perfectly trimmed hedges couldn't hide the news vans parked along its streets. The emergency HOA meeting wasn't held in the usual community center. The crowd, 3 times normal size, including residents from neighboring communities, forced them to convene in the high school gymnasium. Deborah arrived in pearls and a power suit, a binder of HOA bylaws clutched to her chest like armor, her councilman husband flanking her with a practiced politician's smile. Her prepared statement never made it past the first sentence. "Before you speak," interrupted Fire Marshal Rogers, standing with 4 uniformed firefighters, "I'd like to present evidence of 13 documented emergency access failures at that gate, including delayed response to a stroke victim who is now permanently disabled. Evidence that mysteriously disappeared from county records but was preserved by concerned personnel." Gasps rippled through the crowd as he displayed photos of the triple padlocked gate. "Ms. Wilkins," he continued, "do you realize your actions constitute criminal endangerment? That interfering with emergency access is a felony in this state." From the back of the room, Frank, the former treasurer, stood shakily. "I motion for immediate removal of the current board and criminal charges where applicable." The thunderous aye shook the building's foundation. Deborah's husband quietly distanced himself, figuratively and literally, retreating to the hallway for an urgent phone call as his political instincts sensed career-ending disaster. The board voted unanimously for Deborah's removal and installation of a sophisticated emergency access system. As she was escorted out by police officers investigating criminal charges, residents stood in silence, not in respect, but in collective horror at how close they'd all come to tragedy, and how many already might have suffered because of one woman's obsession with control. 3 weeks later, Tyler came home from the hospital, weak but alive, bearing neurological scars that would require years of therapy. The community lined the streets to welcome him, holding handmade signs with messages of love and support. That same day, moving trucks appeared at Deborah's house. She slipped away under cover of darkness, leaving behind a neighborhood forever changed. The following spring, the Pines unveiled Tyler's Law, a statewide legislative initiative requiring all planned communities to maintain unobstructed emergency access routes, with steep penalties for violations. At the dedication ceremony, Tyler, still bearing the physical marks of his ordeal, but smiling brightly, cut the ribbon on the now permanently open emergency gate. Mark never planned to become HOA president, but leadership finds those shaped by fire. Under his guidance, the Pines became known not for its manicured lawns, but for its compassionate community, one that understood that sometimes saving a life requires breaking the rules, and that no property value is worth a child's last breath. 3 weeks later, Mark jolted awake to sirens. Through his bedroom window, he watched emergency lights paint their ceiling red and blue as fire trucks struggled to navigate the Pines' winding roads. By morning, neighborhood gossip networks buzzed. The O'Malley's kitchen fire had spread to their living room because firefighters had been forced to take the scenic route. The emergency gate key had mysteriously gone missing from the lockbox. At the next HOA meeting, Mark arrived with a petition and photos of the fire damage. 5 more minutes, and the O'Malleys could have lost everything, he announced, passing around his documentation. The fire chief confirmed they tried the emergency gate first. Deborah's manicured nails drummed against the podium. According to my conversation with District Chief Williams, my tennis partner's husband, there were no gate issues whatsoever. She flashed a venomous smile. Perhaps if you attended our social events, Mark, you'd know who actually runs this town. As if on cue, half the room, Deborah's carefully cultivated social circle, murmured agreement. The petition died before it reached the second row. That night, Sarah found Mark researching fire codes at 2 a.m. "You're obsessing," she warned, bringing him chamomile tea. "We need to fit in here. Tyler's finally making friends, and," she hesitated, "Deborah chairs the school placement committee. She could make our lives difficult." But Mark couldn't let it go. The next day, he visited the fire station where Battalion Commander Rodriguez showed him disturbing dash-cam footage. Firefighters rattling the locked gate, radio chatter about missing keys, precious minutes ticking away. "This isn't the first time," Rodriguez confided. "But that HOA president, she's married to a city councilman. Reports get filed and mysteriously disappear." As Mark left, Rodriguez pressed a universal emergency key into his palm. "Not exactly protocol, but keep this somewhere safe, just in case." The key felt impossibly heavy in Mark's pocket as he drove home. Passing Deborah, who was measuring a neighbor's Halloween decorations with a ruler, her face twisted in gleeful disapproval. Saturday afternoon arrived with perfect blue skies. HOA-approved weather. Sarah joked as she left for the grocery store. Mark had just finished edging the lawn to the mandatory 2 inches when Tyler raced past on his bike, showing off a new trick. "Dad, watch this." The world shattered 15 seconds later. Tyler's bike clattered to the pavement as he clutched his throat, eyes wide with panic. A half-eaten cookie, shared by a well-meaning new neighbor kid, lay crumbled on the ground. Peanut butter, the forbidden ingredient. Tyler. Mark sprinted across the lawn, catching his son as his knees buckled. Tyler's lips were already turning an unnatural shade of blue, his breath coming in terrified whistles. Hives erupted across his skin like wildfire. The EpiPen. Where was the damned EpiPen? Mark tore through Tyler's pockets with trembling hands before remembering. It was in his backpack inside the house. 60 eternal seconds later, he jabbed the life-saving needle into Tyler's thigh. But the boy's airways continued closing. The epinephrine wasn't enough. Tyler's eyes rolled back as his oxygen-starved brain began shutting down. "Stay with me, buddy," Mark screamed, already carrying him to the car. The 911 dispatcher's voice crackled through his phone, promising an ambulance that would take too long on these winding streets. Every second counted now. Mark peeled out of the driveway, Tyler's limp body in the backseat. He'd make the 3-minute emergency gate route in two, he swore, flying past manicured lawns and shocked neighbors. But as he skidded around the corner to the access gate, his heart stopped. Not only was the original padlock in place, someone had added a second heavy-duty chain with 3 padlocks in series. And standing there, arms crossed in triumph, was Deborah Wilkins herself, clipboard in hand. "This is a restricted access point," she called out as Mark slammed on his brakes. "Residents have been using it as a cut-through. I've been monitoring."